Hi, this is Dr. David Branham. Welcome to the video. It's getting towards the end of the semester. So today the video is going to cover your literature review and your references, as well as your citations for your research paper that is due at the end of the semester. So let me get started by sharing the screen and getting my PowerPoint up. As I said, this is about doing a literature review. And so let's just get right on in. One, a literature review is a collection of articles and books that work as a precursor to your research. So what you're doing is collecting the stuff that's been done before to show the reader what has been done up to this point. So it tells the reader what has been done before. And then two, the literature presented shows that your research is that next step in the research process on the topic. So that's what this literature review is for. First, you have your introduction. Then you have a literature review that basically says, this is what we've done before. And then at the end, you're saying, this is what we're going to do now. To do a literature review now is a whole lot easier than it was when I was in graduate school doing a literature review. Back in the day, we had to go to the library and go through these stacks of paper and look up all the articles that we wanted to see, go to the stacks and probably go to the copy machine. I used to have copy cards that would have $100 worth of copies on them that I would make copies of articles so that I could do my literature review. And I would go look them up one at a time in the stacks, going to floor to floor to find each one. And it was basically took up a half a day just to find the articles that I needed before I even started reading or actually writing on them. Today, you can basically use two websites, Google Scholar and JSTOR. Now, JSTOR, the university has an account with JSTOR, so you should be able to get on there through your university account. Google Scholar is open to everyone. You can do just about anything as far as a literature review, as far as finding articles right here. It's very easy to search on these websites to see where the articles are. And most of the time you can click on the article and get the article. Sometimes it'll give you a summary, and then it'll give you an actual PDF if you want that of the article. So you don't have to make any copies. You can put it on your computer, put the PDFs on your computer, go home and read them, and then type it up. So it's just a lot easier to do now. Contents of a literature review. A literature review is a review of scientific research. Therefore, it should be limited to certain kinds of articles and books. And these include like articles from academic journals. It's an academic journal isn't a regular magazine. It's a research-based publication journal. And most of them usually have the word review or quarterly or science in there, like social science review, political science review, the Journal of Political Science. A lot of them start with journal. Those types of things are there. Okay, same with sociology. You can do it with sociology. They have those types of the American Sociology Association, the American Sociological Review, those types of journals. That's the type of titles that you'll have. So when you go to search, you'll say, oh, okay, these are the titles. These are the academic articles I can look at. Also, books published from university presses are a good place for your literature review. Most of these books are academically based, and you'll find several books on this topic that you're doing that are available where you can read those books and get some good information for your literature review. Articles presented at academic conferences. These are a little more difficult to get because a lot of times they're not uploaded, but sometimes you can get those. Most of the time, the people who are making the presentation will put those on their website somewhere so that people can get those. And then, of course, dissertations, PhD students who are doing their dissertation to get their doctorate, those are good things for literature reviews. So on this particular paper, you have a dependent variable, which is whether or not a person goes to vote. So there are floors and floors for literature on that dependent variable, on voter turnout. who votes, why do they vote, and so forth. Dissertation after dissertation. So you'll have a lot to choose from. So it would be good to narrow that down and find out, the really important literature for your literature review. All these types of publications are acceptable sources for literature review. So look for these. Make sure that you have academic journals, books, articles from academic conferences, or dissertations. Newspapers, manuals, and magazines, there's sometimes times when they're appropriate, or you'll need to add something from one of those. And sometimes you'd get a quote, for instance, something that happened at a time that you want to get a quote or something like that. It's perfectly fine to put that in your literature review or in your paper, but it is not something that you would count as an academic source. So if your number is to have 25 academic sources in your paper, this is not one of them. You're not going to have New York Times as one of your academic sources, or the Wall Street Journal. It's not going to be there. So make sure that if you put these in, that one, you cite them. So you have to understand that they need to be cited, just like the other sources that you might have, especially if it's a quote, you need to cite it, and you need to reference it. Okay, everything that is cited should be referenced, and everything that's in your references should be mentioned and cited in your paper. So, examples of a literature review. Most of the time, the mistake that people make on literature reviews is writing too much. They see a book and they're going to write about the whole book. You don't have to write about the whole book. Almost every book, especially academic books, they almost always answer one question. And yes, they'll answer questions that are basically lead from the first question. But the first question is, the main purpose of the book. So you don't need to talk about everything the book says. You just need to talk about what's important from that book for your literature review. So in a lot of cases, it's one sentence, like this first example. Age, with older people being more likely to vote, increases voting participation. Schaefer, 1981. That is a very short sentence in a literature review, but it is an academic source that you're citing there. And the only thing that mattered from this publication was age. Was a very good determinant on whether or not you're going to vote. So that was the only important thing about that for this particular literature review. So when this person writing this literature review wrote this sentence, it was just because that was the only thing that was important. So if that's the only thing that's important from a whole book, do you want to write in your literature review? It's okay. Go ahead and do that. Now, most of them are a little longer. The second one, the largest predictor of turnout among these variables is education, with those holding higher levels of education voting significantly more often. Once again, a one-sentence citation, this time with 3 authors, actually 5 authors, but 3 different publications. Verba and 1972, Brody, 1978, Wolfinger and Rosenstone in their classic book, Who Votes, from 1980. You have 3 sources here that say education level is a very important part of whether or not you're going to vote. It's probably the most important part. Model after model shows this. People who have a higher education more likely to vote than people who don't. So when you see this, they're making one point that's very important. You can put down 3 sources there that are making that point. And so that's another way where you can have a lot of academic sources going in one direction. So when we're talking about 25 academic sources, sometimes it's not that much in comparison. So remember, you have to abide by the number of sources and you have to abide by the length. Your literature review has to be the proper length and it has to have the proper amount of academic sources. Something more typical is the third one. This is a typical entry for something in your paper. Now, I'll read it here. The goal of getting out the vote by providing information is of high importance to political parties and candidates. Once a possible supporter has been identified, the act of increasing the voters' information can help them make the decision to participate. This surge in political sophistication, which includes the learning the system, having knowledge about the candidates, and knowing procedures, leads to higher registration levels and higher voter turnout. Okay, that's a much more typical entry for a paper such as the one that you're doing. That was Erickson, 1981. So you have, that's a typical literature review entry, and that's kind of how the normal one would be. The first two are very short. It's okay to have a few of those very short, but the normal one would be like that third one, where you're basically explaining in 2 or 3 sentences what the person said and what that person meant, because that's what it's going to take for us to understand how that literature fits in framing your paper. Another thing you can do, the fourth example, recent research found that voter outreach efforts can successfully increase political participation, even when they do not specifically target the community's primary issues. You see here, this is a typical entry on your literature review. This time, it's not something that probably would go to your dependent variable so much as in this case, this paper, it's the independent variable, the one that says, okay, if you get voter solicitation, then you will vote. So this is a typical example of how you need to narrow down your field, because when it comes to actually voting and who votes and determining who votes, there's psychological aspects like your frame of mind, whether you have self-efficacy, self-esteem, and so forth. Those things determine whether or not you will vote. There's sociological aspects, like pressure from society and so forth. That is a determinant of how you vote. But in this paper, we're really looking at things that are more politically installed in as a way for you to vote. So in this case, because getting a piece of paper that says vote for this candidate, we're trying to see if this has an effect on whether or not a person's going to vote. There's other things that are like this, these institutionalized determinants of voting, like how easy it is to register to vote. And in this case, outreach efforts. You know, you want to look at the outreach efforts and see if those articles are available. You need to see what they had said before, because it will help you really frame your hypothesis better in this paper than something that's out there that's a psychological aspect. People with high self-esteem vote. We're really not looking at psychological aspects in this paper. We're looking at you know, when we're trying to as it says here, outreach efforts. What can we do, or what can we do in our institutions to make it easier for people to vote and increase voting? Like making registration easier to do, getting a card reminding you to vote, and so forth. The last example, Nickerson's 2003 study indicated that face-to-face voter mobilization was especially effective in stimulating voter turnout in local elections, with each encounter increasing a registered voter's probability of voting by approximately 7 percentage points. Really good article that hits right at home with this particular research, where you have face-to-face voter mobilization, where you're actually giving a person a card and saying, go vote, and seeing if that has an effect on whether or not they actually make the trip to the polls and vote. Notice also that each one of these are cited. Okay, I want to go to the citation at the end. Now, there's several different ways to do this. As you can see, we have examples here. The first two were just the classic example, where you just put the author and the year at the end. Remember, if you do a quote, you also need a page number in there. You have a document that shows you how to cite in APSA form. So this is typically how you cite. You just put it in parentheses. If you have two articles you're citing with one sentence, put parentheses with the authors and the year, then put a semicolon, and then the authors and year again, and so forth. If you have more than 3 or more authors, just put the first author and then go et al. And then the year. And then if you mention the author's name in the middle of the citation, like the last example, Nickerson's, and then what I did was I put the year in parentheses. You can do that. You can mention the author's name and then put the year in parentheses to indicate that that is a citation. The main thing is you make sure you cite in your article everything that you use. It's very important that you do that. And then make sure that all of those citations are in your references. I want to go over that again because that will be a big part of your paper grade. Everything in your references needs to be mentioned in the text. Everything mentioned in the text needs to be in the references. Critical reference. Now, this is one where sometimes it's not 2 or 3 sentences. Sometimes it's a lot. And this is one that I wrote myself for an article I did way back in 2004, almost 20 years ago, on school infrastructure. It's probably my most cited piece by academics. It's not my most read piece, but it's my most cited piece. And this one, what I put was this quote. Now, this is a long piece for a literature review, but in this case, this is here because it's what I call a critical reference. It's right at the heart and soul of the paper. So sometimes these are necessary because they're so important and so exactly where you're trying to go and lead to. And this one says, Wilson and Kelly proposed that if a building had a broken window and the window was not replaced, all of the other windows would soon be broken. In fact, such negligent, well, I didn't put it there right. Anyway, such negligence would bring about a new culture of disorder, fear, and isolation through the neighborhood. Things that appeared to be in chaos would bring the perception of illegal action, regardless of whether or not the action really took place. Participation in neighborhood activities would cease because one had to risk entering the bedlam that infested the neighborhood. This paper hypothesizes that Wilson and Kelling's theory also holds true for academic communities, and that the condition of school infrastructure has crucial consequences for school performance, specifically attendance and dropout rates. You see here, Wilson and Kelling's theory, I knew about this theory, and I've always thought it's such a wonderful theory because even though, and there's been some papers to help prove it, it's been perceived to be the absolute truth going forward. If you what Wilson and Kelling did was they went to Harlem and they parked the car out front. This is well back in the 70s, maybe early 80s, but they parked the car in Harlem and then they just wanted to sit back and see what would happen to it. After a few days, something was stripped off of it, and then within a matter of hours, the entire car had been stripped down. It had been put on jacks with all the wheels and tires gone. Everything that was of any value had been taken from it, and it was sitting on the side of the road. And so that was the precursor. See, we live in a neighborhood where somebody had vandalized the car, and then everybody just took a license to do that. So then they went to Palo Alto, California, which is Stanford University is there, very rich neighborhood. They put the same type of car, they parked it on the side of the road and let it sit there. Nothing happened to it. There's no chaos in the neighborhood. And this isn't all that surprising, but nothing happened to him. And it all just was fine. So Wilson and Kelly went over, and after a few days, went over and just broke the window in the car. Broke it. Then they went off and decided to see what would happen. Within hours, the entire car was stripped, just like it was in Harlem. Everything was taken from it and so forth. So their theory was that if you allow this type of chaos to come in and exist in your neighborhood, the perception will be that it's a bad neighborhood, things are going to happen, and people will react to that by being bad neighbors, by living in fear of being a victim. And this is something that has spawned a lot of performance change as time has went by. For instance, schools and even in communities now, if you see graffiti go up, in most cases, there's quick action to get the graffiti gone. If somebody goes and paints a school, puts paint on a school, I would venture to guess that a good principal within 1 hour will have that paint either washed up or covered, so that that graffiti will no longer exist. Because when students come and see that, students react to their scene there as if chaos was okay. And the whole attitude of the students changes when that happens. So it's very, very important to keep your thumb on the community when it comes to this stuff. And so what you'll see now is, you don't allow random graffiti, you don't allow random trash to be thrown out on the street. When you police your community very closely, then the culture will be, oh, this is a place where I don't throw trash. This is a place where I don't steal hubcaps. This is a place where I don't break windows. This is a place that doesn't tolerate vandalism. And when you take those steps, it's very important. My article here was that this is true in schools, and that if you had disrepair in your schools, then bad things would happen to your schools. The discipline problems would go up, your attendance would go down, and the research showed that to be correct. And that research, as far as academics go, that research has been cited over 200 times by academics. The governor of Maryland, when he was running for office, used this research to say, look, we need to have new schools because our old schools are dilapidated. He made the argument by using this research. The Environmental Protection Agency has used this research as well to talk about environment inside of structures instead of just looking at the environment outside. So this was a really good article for my career. But I think what was important, one of the most important things about this, though, was that I put this quote, I put Wilson and Kelly first, and showed that this theory was out there and that there was a basis for what I was doing going forward. So if you can find that, it's always a nice thing. And it's worth 6 or 7 sentences if you do that. It's worth putting that in your paper at that length. So that critical reference is sometimes a good idea. I'm not requiring you to have a critical reference, but if you find one, don't be afraid to put a long paragraph in there of your critical reference for a paper. The order for presentation is also important. A literature review should be orderly and present literature in an organized fashion. You shouldn't go from this to this in random fashion. This type of stuff, like going to photo registration to this and so forth, all over the place. You want to organize it in an orderly fashion. So if you're covering your dependent variable, cover that dependent variable at the top and just kind of work your way down and narrow your way down. That's usually a pretty good strategy. Begin with classic articles and books to have that dependent variable. I will tell you that Wolfinger and Rosenstone's Who Votes has long been seen as the book that is the classic with this dependent variable. But as I said, there's also mountains and mountains of other literature on voter turnout. So you should have the ability to put together a pretty good literature review with a lot of focus on what you're doing. And then you narrow that focus, your focus hypotheses, to your hypotheses and, okay, this is what's been said before. Then you really want to get to those articles that talk about your hypotheses, because we're really talking about mobilization efforts and so forth and stuff like that. So if you can get that literature down there at the bottom, it really helps frame you for when you go into your methods section, which will you will start with your hypotheses. And those hypotheses are in your results section in the paper. When you have your paper, you get it out, you get that paper template, you'll see the results are already in there. So you'll be able to see what the hypotheses are there and so forth. So it should be fairly easy to go ahead and hit that method section. But what you want to do is frame that literature for that method section and then those results. A couple of examples, because then the last part comes of your references, and your last section of your paper will be references. You put it up there, and these are a couple of examples. You also have examples in the file on APSA style. So if you're the big thing on APSA style is that they want your full names. You'll be putting full name. And now if you're a psychology major, probably read a lot of articles where it would be Wolfinger, R.E., and you don't even put dots or anything. This is based on Chicago style, the APSA form. So they don't mind taking up a little bit of space on the references. Take up that space. So always start with the names. If there isn't names, then go to that APSA style and say, okay, what do I put down instead of the name? Okay, and make sure you have that. So in this case, we have the names. Wolfinger, last name first for the first article, first author. Okay, first author is last name first. Wolfinger, comma, Raymond E. So his name is Raymond E. Wolfinger. For that first that first author, you want that W. Because what you're going to do in your reference section is put these in alphabetical order. And so that W will be at the bottom. It's important because when you're reading the text and it says Wolfinger and Rosenstone 1980, you want to be able to go right to the reference and see what they're talking about. If you fall back, you're going to go down to the W's because you know it's Wolfinger. And so your reference page has to be in alphabetical order by the last name of the first author. So in this case, it's Wolfinger Raymond E., period, comma, and then and Stephen J. Rosenstone. See, now we put first name first, middle initial, last name. If they don't have a middle initial, don't worry about it. Don't put the middle initial. It's just whatever is on the publication that you're citing. So here you got Wolfinger, last name first, and then Stephen J. Rosenstone, period, and the year, 1980, period. Then the title, Who Votes? And Who Votes has a question mark up there because that's actually in the title. Because the title is the question, Who Votes? And they go through and answer that question with more than 100 pages answering the question of who votes. Then you have the city where the press is, where it was published in the press, and then the press, which is Yale University Press. Okay, so second example is an author. Same thing, last name first, comma, first name. So it's Nickerson, David W., and Ryan D. Fredericks, and David C. King. Okay, 3 authors this time. So you have 3 authors. Know that the first author is last name first. The rest of the authors are first name first. So that's the order in APSA style. And there's no initials unless that is the actual way that the author is presented in the publication. If it says E.W. Stone, then put E.W. Stone. It's okay. But in most cases, that isn't the way things go. In most cases, the author puts their first name. Sometimes they put they put their first name, they make it an initial, and then put their middle name because they like it. It's whatever they have on that publication is the way you do it. But only the first author of the publication is last name first. The rest of them are first name first across. Put in the year 2006, period. Partisan mobilization campaigns in the field, results from a statewide turnout experiment in Michigan. That is the name of the article. Partisan mobilization campaigns in the field, results from a statewide turnout experiment in Michigan, period. So everyone knows in APSI style, the title of the article is first, right after year. And then the name of the journal, Political Research Quarterly. So you'll see a lot of these quarterly. So and so forth. Social Sciences Review, the Journal of Sociological Research, whatever it is, those are the types of titles you have. Put that title down, and then you put the volume. Find the volume on the first pages there. In this case, it's 59. In most cases, the volume coincides with the year. So in 2006, it was the 59th year of that journal. Usually that's how it works. So sometimes journals have 2 volumes in a year, but that's rare. In most cases, it's 1 volume, 1 year. Here, 59 is 2006. It probably means that that journal has been there since 1947 and been publishing since then. And then it's got the colon and then 1. That colon and 1 means that is for 59-1, that is the first edition of volume 59. So you'll know, because you can tell, because it's Political Research Quarterly, that there are going to be 4 volumes. There's going to be it'll be volume 59, and then there'll be 4 sections of that volume as the year goes on. In most cases, the page numbers continue to go up with the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th volume. So each page number is unique in a volume. So in this case, you see the 85 to 97 as the page numbers. Those are the page numbers. And that's indicative of what will happen in a first volume. Once you get to 4, it may be 239 or 346 or whatever. So Political Research Quarterly 59-1, which means it's the first of that year, the first publication of that year. 85 through 97, that's the page numbers of the article, period. Okay, that's an example for you in APSA style. Do your paper in APSA style. Do it in APSA style. It's not that you're going to do every paper in that style. I love APSA style, though, because you put all the information down. And then if you have to convert to, say, American Psychological Association style for your publication, it's very easy to convert because you already have all the information. If you have D.W. Nickerson instead of David W. Nickerson, then you're going to go back and be looking up, what was his first name? APSA style, if you start with that every time, put all the information in there, then it's easy to narrow down. So remember, once again, every book or article that is cited in your text should be referenced, and everything in your references section should be mentioned and cited in your text. Okay? That will end this video. I appreciate you watching, and good luck on your paper. I don't think it's going to take you a long time to do the paper, but if you take your time, do it step by step, it's a great way to get a good grade on it and have a good understanding of it. And I don't think that it's not going to be, length is not going to be a big issue, because I'm not asking for a lot of length on this paper. What I'm asking for is some really meticulous work and some good work that we can see in a short amount of text. Thank you. Have a good day. Please do not hesitate to get in touch with me if you have any needs.